How was the first day of the year in the Zadokite festive calendar determined? And what of the 365th day of the solar year? Let me start with a quote from the tradition of the 364-day calendar versus the calendar polemic in Second Temple Judaism by Mikhail Klukowski. He says, "The intriguing thing is that no textual evidence has yet been found, which would allow us to explain how the community solved the factual disparity between the 364-day schematic year and the solar year, especially over a period of several years or a few dozen decades." Let me translate that. There's no evidence regarding what the primitives did to reconcile the 364-day calendar with the 365.25-day year. But I believe that I may have the schema that can reconcile them in this essay. You tell me. No one yet knows what the users of the 364-day calendar originally did with the first and the 365th day of the year. I can offer you an informed theory from a 1st century BC and AD perspective. The following was gleaned from the studies of many scholars, experts, and the interested. Since 2010, no one else affirms or denies these ideas or claims. As in Klukowski's quote, "There's very little information available on the 1st and 365th day, but here's a caveat. I'm not an expert nor a scholar, but as the MacLeod of a Vero Essene Yahad, it's my business to evaluate and recommend primitive beliefs and practices of our early ancestors in the faith, including such as Ezekiel, the teacher of righteousness, Yeshua, Jesus, James the Just, and so many other reputed pillars. Thank you for taking the time to listen. I covet your friendly commentary." In the 1st century as today, theological denominations used diverse calendars for setting the Leviticus 23 feast dates. The Zadokite 364-day solar calendar is arguably the earliest Hebrew calendar. Its sources and varieties are found throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls and, to a lesser extent, in the canon. Of the Jewish sects, the Sadducees used a variation of the lunar solar calendar purported to conform with the Greek marketplace, which the Sadducees used to greatly increase their wealth as they held back the tithes belonging to the lesser priests to invest in the Greek market. The Sadducees used a luni-solar calendar. The Pharisees used a lunar observance calendar, this is in the 1st century AD, conforming to the Parthian markets, since they are, after all, Pharisees, originating in Persia or Parthia. Thus the name of their sect, HaParush. I am told that their calendar was similar to the Hillel II calendar, but I don't study that one. A variation of the Pharisee calendar is used by international Jewry yet today, that is, minus the Karaites and some Messians like us. The Essenes and Nazarenes and various other non-conforming sects use the more ancient Zadokite 364-day solar calendar in order to continue in the will of Elohim as articulated by the prophet in Ezekiel 44, Enoch, and Jubilees. Yahweh speaks of the tremendous religious power of the sons of Zadok. Just consider the following excerpt from Ezekiel 44:23, reading from the English Standard Version. "They, the sons of Zadok, shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the common, and show them how to distinguish between the unclean and the clean. In a dispute, they shall act as judges, and they shall judge it according to my judgments. They shall keep my laws and my statutes in all my appointed feasts, and they shall keep my Shabbatot holy." The manuscripts of the scrolls, Enoch, Jubilees, etc., make it clear that using a lunar calendar for calculating the festivals is an affront to the deity and an abomination to the worshiper. Yahweh speaks of the sons of Zadok, or Zadokites, as the chiefs in charge of every aspect of the temple and its worship. Again, I refer you to Ezekiel chapter 40, through 44. Yah also says that this is because the non-Zadok priests were perfidious. They could not be trusted. Yah says through Ezekiel that the sons of Zadok are to teach the people clean from unclean, which would include keeping the solar festival calendar accurate and, as one scholar described it, perfect. Since the Sads were the major Jewish political party in Israel at that time, that is from 167 BC to 73 AD, having usurped the authority of the Zadokite priests, murdered the high priest Oniah III, and exiled the rest, and being firmly committed to a Hellenized Judaism, they enforced the Greek lunisolar marketplace calendar on religious Israel and calculated their festivals upon that. Now the Essenes, Galileans, Nazarenes wouldn't conform, and quite outwardly made their resistance public by refusing to go along with animal sacrifices, temple rituals, the temple itself, or the feasts calculated on the lunisolar calendar. Obviously, the feasts of the Essenes, Pharisees, and Sadducees didn't often come out on the same days. The Jews in our time period were not unified on the actual feast days. Even in the 1st century AD, there remained animosity between the Sadducees and the Zadokite priests. Josephus mentioned that the Sadducees went so far as stealing the tithes of the poor or lesser priests. And we imagine, knowing the history, that those lesser priests were the Zadokite priests. We remember that Josephus was from a priestly Sadducean family, while claiming to be a Pharisee and doing his discipleship with the Essenes. He must know something. So each individual generally used 2 calendars, just like we do, a sacred calendar to set and maintain the festival days, and a secular calendar, undoubtedly the lunisolar calendar at that time, for everyday events like baseball games, doctor's appointments. This system is confirmed in the Gospels to some extent, as the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, fix their feast days on the 364-day solar calendar, and John fixed the feast days by the temple calendar. And this is why there's a conflict between the synoptics and John regarding Jesus' time in the tomb. Perhaps this is the tip-off from the 4th Gospel's writer's religious origin, for the text mentions that the author or some, quote, other disciple was known by the high priest, unquote, who was a Sadducee. There was a close connection with the author of the 4th Gospel and the high priest. So with the Essene Nazarene people, again, they used the solar calendar to fix the feasts and the lunisolar calendar of the Sadducees for everyday appointments and such. Just as in Catholicism and some other denominations, the worshippers use 2 calendars, a church calendar for saints' feast days and the secular calendar for mundane appointments. We do the same thing here. It's logical and practical. The people's use of a 2-calendar personal dating system is important to keep in mind, and many amateur calendar makers forget this and hold on to the Essenes' use of the feast calendar for everything. This is an error. When the feasts were finished after the 7th month, remembering that the Zadokites didn't keep Hanukkah or Purim, the sacred Zadok calendar was useless. The only thing for which it was to be employed was to set the feasts. For months 8 through 12, it went unused, unless, of course, some of the minor feasts of those denominations may have been set from the 8th to the 12th months. We just don't know. The Zadokites and their associated sects and allies continued to use their secular calendar alone for their businesses and personal appointments in those months. That is, after the 7th month. There was no need to use a feast calendar, because after the 7th month there were no more feasts. Logical, practical. And that was the only thing the sacred calendar was used for, setting the feasts. Months 8 through 12 became something like ordinary time, as the church calls the months between Easter and Christmas, ordinary time, which is another way of saying that no high holy days existed in those months. Thus, they were just ordinary time. The Zadokite calendar, which has been called by scholars the perfect calendar, unlike the other calendars used, could be calculated by just about anyone. It didn't take a committee or advanced astrological calculation to be executed. All one needed was a stick in the ground once a year and some sunlight. The rest was simple. As for the 365th day, there's no need or reason to account for that, and they just didn't. After they calculated their feasts for 7 months, or maybe right at the beginning of the year, there was no more need. It was considered to be, according to the scrolls and essays, that 365th day, a non-day, N-O-N day. But what is essential for users of the Zadokite feast calendar is that at the beginning of every single year, the first day of the year must be fixed by a set, unchanging interval from the equinox to the year's first day. The questions I receive the most about the calendar is just that. How do you know when the year begins? Now, here's my understanding of this interval between the equinox or equilux and the first day of the year. After the vernal spring equinox, look to the next Sunday, Sunday being the first day of the week. Count from there to the fourth day of the week, which will always be a Wednesday. And there's your first day of the year. The first day of the year can never be anything but a Wednesday, because that day the sun, moon, stars were created as per references in Genesis chapter 1. Once the first day of the year is discovered, the rest of the holy days are plotted through the 7th month using Leviticus 23. Now, I've done this many times, and it's as easy as pie. I don't need to go looking for the head rabbi to figure that out for me. I can do it. You can do it. Months are 30 days in length unless they are divisible by 3. If they're divisible by 3, that month is 31 days, or 91 days per quarter. 4 quarters add to 364 days. Then the year ends. But in actuality, the calendar, again, is only used or useful the first 7 months, because in the land, the lunisolar calendar at that time was the status quo calendar. Everything was figured on that. All your secular appointments, secular holidays, everything else. Sabbath days are always the 7th day or Saturday. Days begin at approximately 6 a.m., and then at 6 p.m., you begin the night of the day until 6 a.m. again, and it's a new day. The day begins at sunup. The night begins at sundown. But we call that night the day's night. Still remains part of the day, so it's very similar to the way we do it here in America. When the next vernal equinox comes around, you set up your New Year's beginning exactly the same way you did the last time. Equinox, first day of the week, fourth day of the week, Wednesday. In this way, there will never be a need for intercalation, extra months, or any kind of extra time at all. This is because, like the solar year of 365.25 days, equinox to equinox is likewise 365.25 days. Working from the equinox each year in exactly the same way in plotting the first day of the year will solve the need for adding any time in the future. Now, Brother Mordecai calculated this out 200 years in the future and was astonished to find out that what I'm saying is true. No need to adjust any time in the future, as long as you start with an equinox and use the same formula for finding the first day of the year. This is so very simple that it's difficult. For several years, it just went over the top of my head. We're used to a 365-day year with a set beginning and an ending, then adding a day every 4 years. But that wasn't the custom of the Zadokites or early Israelites, at least not up until about 171 BC, where the Zadokites received the authority of their calendar directly from Elohim. Again, look at Ezekiel 44. So if they had any reason at all to mark the end of the year, the geniuses of that very early time considered the 365th or 366th day to be non-days. That's what's really different, a difference between our calendar and theirs. I do a lot of reading, and as I said, I am not a genius. I can't quote you the papers in which I read this or the scriptures that's used to justify it, but the justification is in there. And if you want to order up my free calendar pack, you can find out all about it yourself. Yes, the calendar pack is 3. I think that there are 23 scholarly essays in there, which will tell you everything that can be known about this calendar. What I can tell you is that the divine word on the calendar came directly from Yahweh through Ezekiel, the prophet whose mouth touched the coals of the divine fire, and who is still believed to be the founder of the Hasidian Enochian Essene movement. He lived circa 600 BC. This is as simple as I know how to explain the problem of the first and 365th day. They're not problems. They're so simply remedied that they go right over our heads. In their haste or desire for conformity, men and women of today have added several illogical premises to the calendar's simplicity that the true believer needs to closely consider, especially in the context of the thought of the high priest. How would the high priest think? The Zadokite high priest, not the temple high priest. Wouldn't a true Hebrew desire a festive calendar that he could compose himself, one that's given directly from the Elohim, one that's so simple to calculate the festival days that even a caveman could do it? Or would a worshiper rather have a festival calendar that's entirely out of reach, so difficult to conjure up that a central religious committee must do it, so secretive that fire symbols must be used to get the days right, or one that's dependent on the moon with its 354-day year and called sick in the scripture? Unfortunately, at least 50% of the calendars created by sect leaders and labeled Zadokite or Enochian or 364 or Essene, etc., are doing it wrongly, in my opinion, including the Yahad calendar. Only one method is correct, and we are all experiencing calendar confusion. That may be why I have received so many requests for the calendar or for the calendar pack. Some creators of calendars have never researched the calendar themselves, having simply copied another calendar written up by another hasty leader. Remember again, there's no source at this time that gives us an explanation of the Essene's calculation for the placement of either the first day or the 365th day. So we in the Yahad are probably wrong. In a minute, I'll show you what's wrong. Our opinions are mixed on this subject among members, so we decided last year just to go with the flow and accept the most popular formulation for the sake of being among the consensus or status quo. That may have been a mistake. This is the possible error that most make in setting the first day of the year. They find the first day of the year by setting it as the first Wednesday after the equinox, instead of retaining 4 days out from the Sunday after the equinox. Do you get it? Equinox, Sunday, Wednesday, not equinox, Wednesday. Doing it this way, the wrong way, in my opinion, will cause the entire calendar to be off and, in some years, to lose as much as a week. Then there will likely be some intercalation sometime later to be done. But even that error may fix itself within a few years if the beginning of the year is set by the equinox. I expect to hear some calendar cats protesting this explanation and probably, as often happens, vilifying me personally. Nevertheless, let me, like Paul, boast that I have probably done more study and meditation on this subject than 99.8% of the population of the earth. Finally, again, according to high scholarship, people that spend their life every day, examining new texts, examining scrolls, have devoted their life to studying this. There is no direction, they say, from the scrolls at this time as how to calculate the interval between the equinox and the first day of the year. So at this point, I have at least a 50-50 chance of being right, the same chance as those who don't agree. Let me end up here the same way I opened, with an honest quote from Klukowski. The intriguing thing is that no textual evidence has yet been found which would allow us to explain how the community solved the factual disparity between the 364-day schematic year and the solar year, especially over a period of several years or a few dozen decades. Now, why does that Sunday have to be in there when so many people are just skipping it? They're going from the equinox to the next Wednesday. Why? If we remember that Sunday is the first day, Wednesday is the fourth day, and that on the Zadokite calendar, the first day of the year is not necessarily the first day of the week, then we might reckon that these exacting, compulsive Enochians or Hasidians, are they going to leave the first day out of the first week of a new year? I don't think so. They're going to have to put that Sunday in there as the first day of the week after the equinox, so they'll have a complete week in the first week of the year. Otherwise, if they just go from the equinox to the next Wednesday, that first week is not going to be a complete week. It's not going to be a 7-day week in their way of thinking. So that's why I theorize that Sunday must be in there, and it must come after the equinox, so you'll have a complete week for the first week of the year. Now, I believe that this is wrong. Equinox to Wednesday is the first day of the year. I think that's wrong. I think that's incomplete, but it's the majority way. I believe this is right. Equinox to Sunday to Wednesday is the first day of the year. Now, I would love to hear what you think. I did a poll on this about a year or so ago, just among some of the people I know and some on YouTube, and 66% said they used what I consider to be wrong. But 33% used the method by which I think is right. So somebody else is coming up with this besides me. Yes, I would love to have everybody doing the same thing and have the same feast days, but we just do that for the sake of convenience? That's exactly what the Sadducees did. Everything for the sake of their convenience or their money-making schemes. Well, you think about it. I'll try to pop this essay up someplace so you can find it. I thank you for listening. I hope you received something here.